In regional diplomatic circles, this was an unprecedented culture shock. And in the circles of state authorities, it was an assault on the norm. And as President Samia Suluhu Hassan of Tanzania put it, the export of political activism. Dar es Salaam International Airport was busy for flights coming in and going out, especially if you were a political activist. Martha Karua, Willie Mutunga, Hanifa Adan, and others had a short trip to Tanzania, but Boniface Mwangi had a longer one that turned into a painful 4-day ordeal. Activists, diplomacy, and politics. We are on a cross-border assignment. Back home, it was a grand assault on homelessness, as President William Ruto declared the consequential moment of his political career at the square of the newly completed affordable housing apartment blocks in Mkuru kwa Njenga in Nairobi. One tenant is in, 1,079 to go. We assess the project block by block. Jamila's memo is back tonight, but can't quite place the location of the government seal, as government spokesman Isaac Mora places the seal on both ends of his mouth. Bonya's bone picks a bone with governors who, like the government seal, can't decide where to stand on devolution. On some sense, it just doesn't make sense how politicians are handling the IEBC even before the new team is inaugurated. Kaikai's kicker kicks the NCIC for its moral cowardice and obsessions with political correctness. And on my take, where do we find the courage to suggest that the Hustler Fund has lost billions of shillings? The take is brazen, and the news gang is here.
We have been engaging through diplomatic channels, and we've engaged with the Tanzanian authorities, including very early today. And the information I have is that he has been released. So we believe that in good time, there'll be communication, including from himself, after he has found an opportunity to talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. The hashtag is NewsGang at Citizen TV Kenya. We want to begin the conversation that what you just heard from the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Foreign Affairs was earlier this afternoon confirming the release of activist Boniface Mwangi from Tanzanian authorities. And what a day, what a week it has been. Jamila, just take us through what happened from, the moment we started to hear from people at the Dar es Salaam airport that they were not allowed entry into the country?
Yvonne, this started on Sunday when a video was posted during the day by PLP, People Liberation Party leader Martha Karua, accompanied by LSK Council member Gloria Kimani and human rights activist Lynn Ngugi, who are at Julius Nyerere International Airport in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And they had been barred from entering the country. They had been detained, and 6 hours later, they were deported from Tanzania. The three of them, who are guests of the East African Law Society, had gone there also because they were interested in the case against opposition leader and of course, the leader of Chadema party, Tundu Lissu, who has been charged with treason and disqualified from taking part in the elections that are scheduled for October in Tanzania because of what the state says is sustained calls for reforms before the elections. So Martha Karua and her companions, Gloria Kimani and Lynn Ngugi, were deported back to Kenya after 6 hours. They were walikuwa tuko airport. They did not even enter the country. And then a day later, there was more. Other three Kenyans, including former Chief Justice Willie Mutunga and activists Hanifa Adam and Hussein Khalid, were also brought back to the country after 11 hours. They were denied entry, they were detained, and of course not allowed to get into Tanzania because they were also there for the same matter. So they came back to the country and talked about what happened to them, and they talked about how they had been harshly treated at the airport, how they were told that kuna matatizo, they were not really being explained to why they were not being allowed entry into the country. And then now a video came out that night of activist Boniface Mwangi saying that he's in his hotel room and there are strange people outside his room and he's worried about his safety. And of course, it went all on social media, and now it looked like there was a trend not to allow activists into Tanzania, or if they're in there, treat them the way Boniface Mwangi was being treated. And of course, the next morning, there was a video that also circulated of him at the breakfast table, and of course, a gentleman who was asking to identify themselves coming to, and he was taken away. And for 4 days, no one knew where he was. And of course, we had seen his wife, Njeri, and other activists trying to find out what is going on, what happened to him, where is he, we don't know where he is. And there are reports from the Tanzanian government through the government spokesman. It's a clip that we got from Azam TV talking about how he had been released. I don't know if we have that soundbite to listen to him talking about that ameachiliwa, wote waliokuwa hapa nchini Kenya wameachiliwa, so that we can continue with this discussion. Because it seems after that was said, people were saying, okay, kama ashaachiliwa, why don't we see him? But he was not seen. I think when we find the soundbite, we're going to listen to that. And that had been the worry, I think, among most Kenyans, and also especially his family and colleagues, about where was Boniface Mwangi. And I remember, Yvonne, you had an interview here with the Prime Cabinet Secretary and the CS for Foreign Affairs over the same, and a lot of things were said about exactly what happened to Boniface Mwangi, and he did confirm that he was under, he was with the authorities in Tanzania, and that there were negotiations going on to find out where exactly he was. And finally, today he was dumped at around 5 a.m. And he talked about how he was given 400 shillings. He was left at the border, na akatafuta njia until he was found. So I think for most people, it was a relief that Boniface Mwangi was okay, that he was alive and well after four days of not knowing where he was. I know it's a lot of questions have risen around the region about exactly what was this that was really wrong that they had done that warranted them, one, some of them being detained at the airport, not being allowed entry into the country, and two, Boniface Mwangi, and also a Ugandan activist also, whose whereabouts are not known, to face the ordeal that they did. So I think it's a situation that is raising a lot of questions, Yvonne, and I think, Kituku, maybe you may want to add on to that, considering the fact that haya mambo yanaendelea kuwa mbaya.
Right, and it's been a week for the East African citizens to really understand the sort of region they live in. And you recall that there's been a lot of activity in the country, political activity, especially when you look at since the issues of Gen Z started last year. So the country has sort of been on a trajectory when it comes to what Kenyans have been saying. Freedom of expression, you would say, that has really expanded over the past few months, especially if you also look at the sort of engagement that has continued. And so this day on Sunday, when Kenyans are getting to the social media platforms and realizing of what the leaders, some of the leaders who had gone to Tanzania were experiencing, from Martha Karua to former Chief Justice Willy Mutunga. And I remember that actually on Monday morning, that's when we were learning about the post by Hanifa, who was in the company of former Chief Justice Willy Mutunga, for them saying that they just landed at about 2 a.m. and they were being held up until, at the time they were posting was about 3 a.m. And then thereafter, they were not even able to make way to wherever they were going, the mission that they were going to attend a court hearing of the matter against Tundu Lissu. So really, I think it has been that week of Kenyans to also see the other side of the East African countries, looking at Tanzania, and of course, eventually, the president of Tanzania, Samia Suluhu, getting to express herself on exactly what she thinks about the activities that Kenyans have been expressing. We'll be listening to the president of Tanzania, what exactly she said in regards to what Kenyans have been doing, and saying that it's only Tanzania that remains in a position where they are there's a bit of what you may describe in different words of sanity, and really Kenyans getting to engage even on the different platforms on social media, including the responses that we're hearing from some of the persons that are very close to the government. So quite an interesting week for Kenyans to see that. I don't know if you have President Samia Suluhu to really express herself on what exactly she was saying about her country and the Kenyans getting to Tanzania.
We thought tumeanza kuona mtiririko au mwenendo wa wanaharakati ndani ya region yetu hii kuanza kuvamia na kuingilia mambo yetu huku. Sasa kama kwao wameshadhibitiwa, wasije kutuharibia huku. Tusitoe nafasi. Walishaharibu kwao, walishavuruga kwao. Nchi iliyobaki haijaharibika. Watu wako na usalama na amani na utulivu ni hapa kwetu. Kuna majaribio kadhaa. Niwaombe sana vyombo vya ulinzi na usalama na nyinyi wasimamizi wa sera zetu nje kutoa nafasi kwa watovu wa adabu wa nchi nyingine kuja kutovuka hapa kwetu. Hapana. Nimeona klipu kadhaa za kunisema niko bias na nini. Nalofanya ni kulinda nchi yangu na ndio wajibu niliopewa. Kwa hiyo hatutatoa nafasi kwa kiumbe yoyote kuja kutuvurugia hapa. Awe yupo ndani au anatoka nje. Hatutatoa hiyo nafasi.
Right, a very clear message that if you had any doubt that whatever was happening was an accident, this appears like it's a state-sanctioned sort of activity or response from the explanation given by the President of Tanzania. Tusikubali watovu wa adabu kuja kutovuka hapa. I mean, that's a very loaded message. And never mind the flair of Swahili that she speaks in. But clearly you can see the consequences that seeing the former Chief Justice, Willy Mutunga, getting back to a country. And I think he went to school there. So really, for such to happen, it's a weighty issue. So one wonders what information they had against these people, because the immediate former Chief Justice, David Mbaraga, was actually allowed into that country to attend the court matter of Tundu Lissu, who is facing some treason charges. But I think it also opens the door for us to really have an analysis of what exactly is happening in this African region, Yvonne.
Yvonne, yes, I'm sorry, when I was speaking in the beginning, sorry I interrupted, I was talking about how Boniface Mwangi had come back, and he was talking about his ordeal. And I was wondering if we could listen to the sound bites of him talking about how he was dumped in the border between Kenya and Tanzania.
It was dropped about 5 a.m. They gave me 400 shillings and 20,000, I think, Tanzanian shillings. Where they dropped me, they told me when they dropped me, I should not speak or look at them because the entire time was blindfolded.
And he talked about how he was found, but he also explained his ordeal in the cells, because when Boniface Mwangi was seen for the first time, there was a clip, he was actually being assisted to walk. So he told reporters at Wilson Airport what he went through in the cells. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Blindfolded since Monday night until this morning. We were both treated worse than dogs, chained, blindfolded, and underwent very gruesome torture.
And of course, we talked about how this was a difficult ordeal for his family. His wife, Njeri Maina, has been out since day one, pleading for information about where he is. And today, of course, when he was found, she talked about what his experience was when he was dumped at the border. Let's listen to what Njeri had to say.
He was dumped by himself. They were separated, and we don't know where Agatha is or where she was taken. As at now, unless the media can say that they have heard from Agatha's family, we do not know. But Bonnie was dropped in Horohoro border post, and he found his way up to Lunga Lunga and got transport.
And of course, they mentioned about the other activists from Uganda, the lady called Agatha, who they are worried about her. And Hussein Khalid from Vocal Africa also spoke and said that she actually went through what Boniface Mwangi did. Let's listen to Hussein.
Don't take this lightly. Boniface Mwangi was severely tortured. Agatha, the same thing. And as we speak presently, we don't know where Agatha is. At least we are seeing Boniface. We want to rush him so that he can get medical treatment. His condition is not good at all. As you will see clearly, he can barely walk. This is courtesy of Mama Samia's government. He was badly tortured in Tanzania. And every time they were doing this, they kept making reference to the president. asking him to say Asante Mama Samia, as they were torturing him.
No, I think for the family and the activists and what has been said, for them, I think it's a relief that after 4 days of not knowing where he was, that Boniface Mwangi is actually finally home.
And what an interesting time. So 4 days there, and the biggest accusation here is activism. Now, what I find interesting is, especially since the events of June, July last year, there's been a sustained effort to give activism a bad name. And so being an activist is a bad thing. Activism is wrong. Activism can't possibly be something that is exercised of free will. Activism is something that is being imported into this country and into the region by other forces elsewhere. People are being paid to be activists. There's been a very sustained effort to demonize activism. And you saw that was the same thing that the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs said here on the explainer, that, we have etiquette and there's things that we do. And you saw that activism, or bad manners, or whatever it is they want to call it, exercised online. There have not been kind words that have been said. But therein lies the problem, right? That you find leaders are uncomfortable with words that are being said, with the way people express themselves, and they see it as a threat to national security of sorts. And that is what we're seeing. I mean, that's the trend, isn't it? Utovu wa adabu. Perhaps in the Tanzanian dialect of Kiswahili, that is okay. But here, that's the sort of language that you reserve when you're speaking to young truant children. And that is what you're seeing coming from the head of state, as well as from other leaders, here in the country. That's what this boils down to, Jay?
Yvonne, I think Tanzania has always pushed the button on this Jumuiya thing. They've tested it. And they're doing it particularly because as Kenyans, we've enjoyed the liberties that comes with freedom of expression for far too long. It become ingrained in our daily lives, and therefore for us, such kind of activism are normal things. If you look at the ruling party of Tanzania, the CCM, in its genealogy, you will not find opposition or dissent anywhere. The way it is structured is such that you have to be loyal, you have to be dedicated both to the state and the person of the president. That there's no room for dissent. There's no room for a different conversation. And therefore, what is common and familiar and usual for us in Kenya is deeply frowned upon in Tanzania. And that is why you found the Prime Cabinet Secretary and CS Foreign Affairs, Musalia Mudavadi, struggling, because as a Kenyan, he knows that activism has been a way of life. He particularly has also been a beneficiary of such kind of activism. But here he is trying to balance issues around the interest of Kenyans and that of the state. Mm-hmm. So for the state, they did not really want to antagonize Tanzania in any way. And that is why he came up with such sentiments that he said here, and actually affirming what President Samia Suluhu was saying, that what these people had taken or were exporting to Tanzania was nitovu wa nidhamu. However, he also knew very well that back home he was walking on eggshells. Yeah. And therefore he was trying to be very cautious. And for me, that is why you saw after that engagement, there was a flurry of activities from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, trying to show that indeed they're engaging their partners, the other side, and trying to find a solution. These engagements should not have waited for Tuesday or Wednesday. They should have started on Sunday, as soon as Martha Karua and her group indicated that they had been detained and deported. When Monday morning we woke up to tweets indicating that CJ Emeritus Willie Mutunga was also detained. And I want to believe Dr. Mutunga does not carry any normal passport. Right. It's a diplomatic passport. Yes. Yeah. He's supposed to be accorded some kind of state a reception when he lands in the other side. But for Kenyan government to wait for days before responding to these issues, I think that was rather too late, prioritizing the interstate engagement as opposed to what was right for their citizens, and especially citizens not of any cadre, but a former Chief Justice.
Yeah, I want us to listen to illustrate what you were talking about with the Cabinet Secretary trying to walk that tightrope between the interests of the state and the interests of the citizen. I'd like us to listen to Wanaid Mudavadi talking about the freedoms that Kenyans enjoy.
We need to also appreciate that sometimes we take the freedoms we have here for granted. I think it should also be a wake-up call to us in Kenya that how we operate, how we speak, how we express ourselves does not necessarily please or work in other countries.
But then it's this troubling statement about insults, you know, and whether that goes overboard. C.S. Mudavadi had this to say.
Let us face a few facts. The level of etiquette, the level of insults that we see bandied in Kenya, even though we have the freedom of speech, is sometimes going overboard. All right? So to the extent that she's saying that people sometimes have gone to extremes in their utterances in Kenya, it's a fact.
It's a fact, he says.
Well, I think what the Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary has really labored to try and paint is what you can do here in Kenya, you can't do in Tanzania. I think that's what he's trying to say in very, very diplomatic language. But he still falls short of expressing what exactly was wrong with what we've seen this week. And if we assess it from the point of view of the political cultures, then there is a valid point being raised in what is possible in Dar es Salaam and what is possible in Nairobi. And one thing that is yet to come out clearly is what was the breach. So we are left here to make assumptions. And I make this assumption basically and purely based on the fact that there was Chief Justice, former Chief Justice David Maraga, who made it to the same court that former Chief Justice William Mutunga did not. Former Constitutional and Justice Minister Martha Karua did not. Activist Boniface Mwangi, if that is where he was going, did not. So the question is, what was the difference? And the difference may eventually lie with the details. We need to find out exactly whether accreditation, proper due accreditation, was done in whether when the East African Law Society welcomed Martha Karua, did the prerequisite clearance been sought with the government of Tanzania to allow this to happen? Because there are very small things that can make you come back to your country or being denied access. And even at the media level, if you go to Kampala right now, where you start as a journalist is the media center, where you get accredited, a big badge and all that. But of course, we are not lost to the fact that this is one of Tanzania's most sensitive political cases. The treason trial of opposition leader Tundu Lissu. And he actually faces the death penalty if he is found guilty. Now, in Kenyan standards, this is, for lack of a better word, unthinkable. It's not something you can have at this age. But we need to be aware of the different stages the East African nations appear to be when it comes to this whole issue of democracy. if I look at the Tanzanian situation, Tanzania to me appears like a very reluctant multi-party democracy. I call it reluctant because we see regression. Treason trial for an opposition leader only suggests repression, a political environment that is not completely free. Yet when you look at Tanzania and Kenya, we got to multipartyism almost at the same time, early 90s. And you look at the elections, they've been conducted in very, there are a lot of similarities. Only that Tanzania retains a very strong central ruling party that is run completely different compared to other parties. It was like the days of Kenya African National Union KANU when it was strong, where the party is really run from the center. It has very strong structures. It has grassroots support and all that. What we have seen in Tanzania is the strengthening of CCM and the progressive weakening of opposition parties. So they are where we are some time back. And what this has done is the opposition parties have been, in my view, growing weaker by every year, by the way. Mm-hmm. They had chaguzi za mitaa the other day, which is local elections, which were swept by the CCM. Mm. The National Assembly there, the parliament there, is almost close to 90% CCM. So it's not a good reflection of the balance of multipartyism. But look, when President Samia Suluhu Hassan spoke, she spoke about utovu wa nidhamu wamechafua kwao. She's obviously referring to our political environment. Just the same way we are analyzing theirs, they analyze ours. And is there something inspirational about ours? We need to separate our freedom of speech, civil liberties from our political culture. They run a more sophisticated political culture, in my view, compared to us. It's actually way more mature than ours is. It's way more structured than ours is, because the ruling party is as organized as KANU used to be. What is the ruling party of Kenya today?
UDA. Sorry, broad-based.
We are confused.
Okay. Yeah, why are you confused? What is the ruling party of Tanzania?
I think Linus raises a good point, because in the past we have actually talked about how much we admire the way the structures are.
So if they were to invite, and that annoys them, that who are you really to tell us anything politically? And they are more ideologically grounded than we are. Let's take these facts home. CCM is a socialist party, and its policies are really socialist in a way. And it's remained consistent for so many, many years. So you could see Suluhu Hassan, the president, almost losing her patience with who the hell is this trying to show us how to do politics. But that's why I want to separate. We have a more robust civil liberty space than they do, but they have a more sophisticated political environment than we do. CCM is a party of adults. I can say that without doubt. The structures actually produce leaders. They have a central committee, they have grassroots support. Their only problem is they have not allowed the opposition to grow in the same way, which is why they're in a more delicate environment. And in terms of political progress, you worry about what happens when CCM loses its strength. I just wanted to make one more last point on, especially just looking at President Suluhu Hassan. Relations between Kenya and Tanzania have always been very delicate. We are brothers and sisters, but there are some underlying historical issues that make it really, really delicate. It's almost as if you've been in a broken relationship and then you are back, and then there's so much that happened in that. And there's so much that happened between Kenya and Tanzania, includes the 1977 collapse of the East African Community, which was driven and inspired by Kenyans. It was the Attorney General of the time, Charles Mogani Njonjo, who was really running the show in terms of how the East African community should progress. And Tanzania has never recovered from that wound because they came to this trusting that the East African community, Jumuiya, is something good. Let's remember also that Tanzania even offered to delay their independence to allow Kenya to be independent so that they all come together as the East African community. So on betrayal, if I could borrow Rigathi Gachagua's betrayal, Kenya actually did betray Tanzania in between 1966 and 1977 by just being the untrustworthy neighbor. Of course, there was the argument that Tanzania is socialist, we are capitalist, Uganda was a dictatorship under Idi Amin, so ideologically we can't get along. Use of ideology at the time really was dishonest because in the end it was really about the very narrow interests of the ruling minority at the time in Kenya. There's also something else that we need to know about Tanzania now that we are exporting freedom to them. At the time, Tanzania was supporting the African National Congress, ANC,
in South Africa,
complete with a military base in Morogoro to train Umkhonto we Sizwe in South Africa. Charles Njonjo and the Kenyatta regime were busy causing up to the apartheid regime in Pretoria. And so there are so many things that make our relationships really so, and it takes a lot of time for that to heal. So sometimes it takes something as innocent as Boniface Mwangi's arrival in Dar es Salaam to scratch some of these old wounds.
But Linus, there may be people who will say you'd rather have what we do, which is, of course, a less structured political system where our parties are multi-purpose vehicles for elections. You asked us which party is in power, and we were a bit confused about who exactly is in. Is it broad-based? Is it UDA? Is it ODM? And we had TNA, and then Jubilee, and then, NARC, and all that. KANU was there for a long time. You'd rather have that confusion that we have, but still have these other freedoms to be able to express ourselves, to be able to oppose the government, to be able to speak out in public without the worry of maybe being arrested or detained or any of that happening. And so which is the greater good in this instance? Is it having those good political structures but then having an opposition voice that is being silenced and a freedom of speech that is not being allowed to thrive, or have that beautiful structure that you talk about but then all other freedoms are almost kind of like kukandamizwa?
But you have to understand where the East African region, and I suppose most African states are, considering the unprecedented events that we had in the country June 2024 and July. Africa, all of Africa has a predominantly youthful population. And so for all of these African nations and African heads of state to see these young people suddenly very politically aware, very politically conscious, and taking their space in the political discourse, and seeing what happened here, even with the invasion of Parliament, I wonder, to be a fly on the wall for what sort of conversations were happening within the political circles of the ruling parties in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Sudan, in South Sudan. And so you can imagine these very people who then led what was a, largely youth-led revolution in the country last year, now going to their country. For many of them, this was a scary moment. June last year was definitely frightening for them. And to the extent of exporting political activism, that idea, of course, was everywhere, right? We were trending the world over. To now have the architects and, the main drivers of it, I know they said they were leaderless, but let's be honest, these were the leading lights, of that moment. And they're going into Tanzania, and they're going in to observe the trial of opposition leader Tundu Lissu. You would imagine, what this means for them. And that's why you see President Samia Suluhu Hassan being very forthright that, you know, whatever happened there, I don't want it to happen here. I mean, she would not fathom the young people getting up, speaking for their rights and going to Parliament. Neither would President Yoweri Museveni. You know, or the others. You know, Sudan is having its own issues at the moment, but imagine if you were to add in, you know, the portion of the youth. So this is where we are. This is a real fear, you know, for many African leaders, and particularly the ones who are just right next door. And for me, I think that's what that speech represented, that I do not want what happened there to happen here. And it could very well spread. I mean, just like we've seen the spread of coups that is happening, or, you know, that took place in West Africa, you know, once it happens in one country, you know, the courage to stand up and speak up for oneself in the next, you know, is something that is very, very possible. So, you know, I think that's where that was coming from. And you saw even here, now the politicians here using that opportunity to try and score political points against the youth, against the activism. I'd like us to listen to Senator Cherargei supporting the president and saying some rather interesting things on the floor of the House.
People should avoid bad manners. I want to thank Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan for calling out activists who wanted to go and disrupt the peace in Tanzania. In fact, should have detained and prosecuted them because they have taught this country bad manners, Mr. Speaker. These activists, they have taught our people to insult, to undermine, to lose respect to the leadership of this country, Mr. Speaker. Tanzania is a very peaceful country. And what President Samia Suluhu Hassan said, we should respect our countries, Mr. Speaker. There is mutual respect. So I want to ask the President Samia Suluhu Hassan that in the spirit of East Africa, he should assist us to discipline some of these ill-behaved activists that have continued to destabilize Kenya, Mr. Speaker.
And so you notice again who it is that is complaining. It's President Samia Suluhu Hassan, who is in government, and now it is those who are in the ruling administration, you know, whatever animal that is, and he's not the only one. It's rather curious when this next individual speaks. It would be hard to imagine he doesn't have the ear of the person he works directly for. Listen.
Na munaona wamepeleka tabia mbaya Tanzania. Sisi tunataka kuheshimu majirani nchi zetu za nje. Nyinyi wa Kenya hapa kutoka South Mugirango, hao watu ambaye wako na bad manners, wafungwe wasifungwe? Wamehamia Tanzania kwa sababu wameokopa kushindana na Mheshimiwa William Ruto. Munaona wameenda huko kushindana na Suluhu. Tunawaambia wakuje hapa South Mugirango, wause sera, wasiuse ukabila.
Okay, again, I find this characterization of activism as bad manners particularly troubling. Linus.
Which really cancels out any notion that there is something collective about Kenyans. There is nothing collective about Kenyans. Yeah. What you've just seen from the political class is the kind of political immaturity that makes us the laughingstock of the region. That was a member of parliament speaking on the floor of the House. That cannot happen in Dodoma if it was some Tanzanian held here for whatever reason. Because there's something here we call Nyuma tent, where you take your shame away from the face of the...
Maybe we don't have a tent.
We don't have a tent. Now we have our politicians competing to either support or... Oh, actually, I've not seen anybody.
Support, yeah.
It's all support Samia Suluhu Hassan. I think she is laughing and having her Kawatungu... Kawatungu, enjoying it, just watching at the political immaturity across the border. This is shameful. There's some time you keep quiet. And I think political opinion was not required on what is going on in Tanzania at all. This was diplomatic. It was a diplomatic issue. And I think kudos to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I saw statements by P.S. Korir Sing'oei, which were actually matching the occasion in terms of just not denying our citizens that are in trouble in Tanzania, not saying hang them, but saying we are doing something behind and through the diplomatic channels. That is maturity. I think what we've seen from Cherargei and Farouk there, that is a statement on our low sense of ideology, poor sense of collective values that make us a nation. Boniface Mwangi, whether he's an activist or not, Martha Karua, an activist or not, when they are trouble outside, as long as it's not terrorism or drug dealing, they are citizens of Kenya first. And the first instinct of a nation is to speak for its citizens. Are we now surprised why citizens come back in coffins from Saudi Arabia and other places, and Burma and other places?
You're on your own.
You are on your own. So we need a lot of fixing. I think Samia Suluhu Hassan was right. Wameharibu kwao, and I think she's speaking about all of us.
And, you know, there's still a question. So when Senator Cherargei says that they should have been arrested and prosecuted, what offense is that? Yeah. You know, Senator Cherargei is actually a lawyer. He went to the law school to study law. Okay. He sits in the Senate to make laws. He's a legislator. He also sits there to oversight the government, in this case, on its implementation of county-facing functions. So what in that was protecting the interest of the counties, in whatever that he was saying? What in that he is saying is about oversighting, whether it's the counties or even the national government? I wonder why he actually chose to say those words, because does he understand the context of why these human rights or social rights activists were in Tanzania? Because you're talking about sentiments that Tundu Lissu is claimed to have uttered in a rally on the 3rd of April 2025. And I just referenced what is contained in the charge sheet. It partly says, "It is true we say we will prevent the election. We will inspire rebellion. That is the way to get change." It also continues to quote him as saying, "So we are going to spoil this election. We are going to really disrupt. We are going to spoil it very badly." That is according to the charge sheet, and that's why he is in court. He was presented for the first time, I believe, on the 10th of April, but has never taken plea. In the session that was this week, still didn't take plea because the prosecution side said that they're still continuing with the investigations. They'll be back in court on the 2nd of June. So for these activists to go to Tanzania to witness or to oversee whatever was happening in court, I wonder how that makes it an offense to an extent that a senator of the Republic of Kenya would take the floor to make such kind of sentiments, a person that is supposed to protect the interest of the people. Now, at the same time, you realize the president of Tanzania has spoken. And of course, before then, you would say that it's up to the authorities in Kenya to intervene for their citizens. There's the Constitution of Kenya, and if you have to look at it, the oath of office for the president, among many other things, says that the president takes the oath and swears to protect and uphold the sovereignty, integrity, and dignity of the people of Kenya. I wonder what this means, especially at a time that the president of Kenya also chairs the East African Community Summit. So really, it's a platform that he would have to speak to his peers on whatever is happening, because really, the sort of torture that Boniface Mwangi is saying should not be dealt against any Kenyan or even East African citizen, if you like. So I think there are certain questions to be asked. Of course, we must acknowledge the effort that has been made to the extent that now Boniface Mwangi is back at home and with his family. Of course, you can see that he's distraught. He says that he has been tortured for a couple of hours and days. So we'll be expecting, at least for the sake of the citizen, in the name of Boniface Mwangi, because previously you have seen the government of Kenya intervening for Kenyans who have actually been convicted of international crimes. Action has been taken. They have come in to assist, to have them freed, to negotiate for their release. In as much as
to pay hefty fines.
Exactly. In as much as action has taken long for even people convicted of international drug dealing or narcotics, what is the word?
Offenses.
The transportation of... trafficking, yes, trafficking of narcotics. If the government of Kenya is concerned about such a citizen, how about some citizens that play a very important role in the civil rights space in Kenya, because these are not unknown people. They are known. They have actions. Some of them have been Chief Justice.
Yeah.
So really, so much remains to be seen. And as we protect the integrity and sovereignty of the Republic of Kenya, we would want to see at least Kenya regaining its pride before its peers, because we may celebrate the rights, the spaces that we have, but we cannot become the laughingstock of the community.
And just as you come in, Jay, you know, these are the same politicians who are constantly telling Kenyans to be patriotic and to speak for Kenya.
Yeah.
And yet they are the first ones to ask for Kenyans to be incarcerated in other countries?
Basically, it's bad manners. And I think just to cap what we've been talking about, if we could just hear the PS MFA, Sing'oei, on what the government obligation was and how they ought to have handled it. I think it's 1.23, Robert? Good.
We are under an obligation to be able to speak out when our citizens are, are apprehended in particularly high, persons, and therefore we would want to understand what could have, led to this situation.
Yeah. And I think the closure would be understanding what exactly these gentlemen and ladies did wrong in getting into Tanzania and getting deported back at home. But then again, Sing'oei went ahead to explain that as Kenyans, we must really understand that our liberation journey has matured, sort of. But then our neighbors, they are still evolving. And in as much as we need to be our brother's keepers, I think they ought to learn and accept some of these criticisms, because that is what will make them a better democracy than what is currently is in Dar es Salaam.
And after,
yes.
I just want to jump in there because Bonyo raises something critical there. First of all, the PS stands out quite well in his response. This is typically, and this should have been the only reaction we should have had from
the state.
From the state and anybody associated with it. No Cherargei, please, not at all. This is not your space.
Sure.
These are complex things that are really should be the preserve of the likes of PS Sing'oei and above. That should have been left there. But now the point of us thinking we can mature the region and all that, we can't, not after what happened to Besigye, Kizza Besigye, the opposition leader here.
Yeah.
Kizza Besigye was actually arrested and picked from Nairobi by Ugandan security agents.
From Nairobi.
From Nairobi. Yeah. And Riverside must be the center of Nairobi, really, for foreign agents to come all the way to pick a prominent opposition leader from Nairobi. It's not saying anything about the maturity we think we can export. So I think there's a lot of work to be done at home. On the foreign policy front, we make 5 steps forward and 6 backward, which is really sad. The Kizza Besigye case is something very regrettable about the handling of foreign affairs and regional affairs in this country. Kizza Besigye is currently incarcerated in detention in Uganda. The last time we saw him, he was not in good shape.
He wasn't actually even this week when Martha Karua was there in court. He's looking quite frail.
Yeah. So as the government accuses activists of exporting activism, let's not forget the state may have did play a role in exporting Kizza Besigye to detention.
And they admitted it. As we take a break, let's also remember this is the country where, diplomatically, a Pakistani journalist who was seeking refuge in this country was killed in this country. So in certain ways, I wonder to what extent we've evolved. Nani ndio ameharibu is the question. Let's take a break. When we come back, we have lots more to talk about. We'll be right back.